she thought he was just a janitor, invisible, unimportant. With one order she fired him and erased him from her world. But what she didn't know was that this man carried a secret, a truth so powerful it could change her daughter's life forever. When the miracle finally appeared, it wasn't the doctors or the billionaires who saw it first. It was the man everyone overlooked. The 47th floor of Harrington Global Bank was a world built for power. Vast glass walls reflected the Manhattan skyline, while polished marble floors gleamed beneath the glow of recessed lighting. Every detail spoke of wealth, precision, and dominance. This was not a place where mistakes were tolerated. It was a place where silence reigned until it was shattered. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" The voice came like a thunderclap in a stormless sky. It wasn't just loud. It was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Ethan Moore froze. He was crouched on the marble floor, one hand still outstretched, a small red rubber ball resting a few inches from the wheels of a custom-built wheelchair. His tool belt weighed heavily on his hip, jangling faintly as he slowly straightened. The uniform he wore, a simple maintenance polo, faded work jeans, and scuffed boots, made him invisible in these halls of glass and steel. He was a man whose presence was meant to be unnoticed, whose footsteps were supposed to blend with the hum of the air conditioning, but in that moment, every eye in the hallway was locked on him. At the doorway to her office stood Victoria Harrington, CEO of Harrington Global, one of the most influential financial institutions in New York. Her face was a mask of cold fury, sharp features set in stone. She radiated the kind of power that could make a room fall silent with just a glance. Tonight, her fury was reserved for Ethan. Beside her, in a navy blue suit tailored to perfection, was her stepbrother Michael Harrington. His expression was carefully arranged into one of concern, lips pressed into a thin line, brows furrowed as though he shared in his sister's shock. He placed a hand on Victoria's arm, the gesture protective but rehearsed. His voice was low, but pitched just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Victoria, my God, this is disturbing," he murmured. Ethan felt the heat of their stares boring into him. He wanted to explain, to tell them what he had seen, but his throat was dry, words stuck like stones. Victoria's heels clattered like gunfire as she strode forward, her every step echoing in the sterile hallway. "Look at me," she hissed. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with a dangerous, coiled rage. "Do you think my daughter's life is a joke? Do you find this funny?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I didn't mean any harm. I thought you saw a child who can't walk," Michael cut in smoothly, his voice rich with condescension. "And you thought it would be amusing to roll a ball at her. What kind of monster does that?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond to Michael. Instead, his eyes shifted past them, locking on the girl in the chair. Lily Harrington, 7 years old, sat with a stillness far too heavy for someone her age. Her small hands clutched a frayed teddy bear, the fabric worn thin from years of use. Her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, were fixed not on the adults, but on the ball resting at her wheels. She hadn't spoken a word. She hadn't moved. But Ethan had seen it. Minutes earlier, the teddy bear had slipped from Lily's lap and hit the floor. And in that tiny, unguarded moment, her left leg had twitched beneath the pink blanket that draped her knees. It hadn't been a spasm. It hadn't been an illusion. It was a reflex, unmistakable to anyone trained to see it. A spark of life in nerves the doctors had declared dead. The ball hadn't been a game. It had been a test. A desperate, reckless test. "I used to be a physical therapist," Ethan said finally, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I saw a response. The ball was just to confirm it." Victoria's laugh was short and brittle, sharp as shattered glass. "And now you're a janitor. That tells me everything I need to know about your judgment." Her eyes burned with fury. "You're fired." The words landed with the finality of a verdict. There was no room for appeal, no chance of redemption. Almost immediately, 2 security guards appeared, silent and efficient, their presence as inevitable as the sunrise. One placed a heavy hand on Ethan's arm. "You heard her," Michael said, his polished smile returning like a mask slipping back into place. Your services are no longer required. Ethan didn't resist. He knew better. He let the guards guide him down the hall toward the service elevator. Still, he couldn't stop himself from looking back one last time. For a fraction of a second, Lily's eyes met his, and in them he didn't see confusion. He didn't see fear of him. He saw fear of them. The service elevator closed with a soft hiss, sealing him off from the gleaming marble and glass world of the 47th floor. Victoria knelt beside her daughter, her fury melting into trembling tenderness. She touched Lily's hand gently, her voice breaking as she whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. He's gone. The bad man is gone." The elevator doors slid open into the loading bay at street level. A blast of cool night air hit Ethan's face as he stepped into the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. His access badge was deactivated. His final paycheck would arrive in the mail. In less than 10 minutes, the fragile stability of his life had evaporated. But it wasn't just his job he had lost. He thought of Sophie, his 9-year-old daughter, waiting for him in their cramped apartment across the river in Queens. Sophie, who filled their peeling walls with drawings of suns and stick figures, who needed daily asthma treatments he could barely afford. Sophie, whose laugh was the one thing that made the weight of the world bearable. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the cracked screen lighting up with the lock screen photo of Sophie grinning with a gap-toothed smile, crayons clutched in her hand. She was the reason he had swallowed his pride and taken this janitorial job. The reason he traded the unpredictable hours of physical therapy for night shifts that let him make her breakfast every morning. Now, it was gone. The rent, the medication, the insurance, all of it, and yet Ethan couldn't shake the image of Lily's leg twitching beneath that blanket. The reflex was real. He had trusted his instincts before, on accident victims, stroke survivors, children who had been told they'd never walk again. And he had been right. What if this wasn't just a medical oversight? What if something darker was happening behind the glass walls of Harrington Global Bank? As rain pooled at his feet, Ethan realized with a cold certainty he hadn't just lost his job. He had stumbled onto a secret someone would do anything to keep buried. The rain-soaked streets of Manhattan glistened under the amber glow of streetlights as Ethan Moore trudged forward, his boots splashing through shallow puddles. His shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of what had just happened. Fired, humiliated, dismissed, as if his very existence meant nothing. Yet beneath the sting of humiliation, something darker, sharper, gnawed at him, the flicker of movement he had seen in Lily Harrington's leg. Most men would have convinced themselves it was nothing. A trick of the light, a desperate illusion of hope. But Ethan wasn't most men. Years of working as a physical therapist before his life collapsed had trained him to spot details others ignored. He had seen that twitch. He would stake his life on it. And deep down, he knew that twitch carried consequences far beyond a child's condition. By the time Ethan reached Queens, the city had shifted into its nocturnal rhythm. Yellow cabs honked along the avenues, neon signs buzzed outside corner bodegas, and steam hissed from manhole covers. Ethan climbed the cracked steps of a weathered brownstone and pulled open the heavy door, greeted by the faint scent of fried onions from a neighbor's apartment. Their home was on the 3rd floor, a cramped one-bedroom that smelled faintly of cinnamon toast and bleach. Peeling wallpaper curled at the edges, and water stains spread across the ceiling like bruises. Sophie was sitting cross-legged on the worn couch, crayons scattered across the coffee table, her sketchbook open in front of her. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, her gap-toothed grin lighting up the room. She held up a drawing proudly. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, stood beneath a lopsided sun. Above them she had written in shaky block letters, "Me plus Daddy, she's super team." Ethan forced a smile, his heart aching at her innocence. "That's beautiful, Soph. We'll hang it right next to the masterpiece wall." The masterpiece wall was every inch of plaster they could spare, covered with Sophie's drawings. Castles, animals, superheroes, each one taped up to hide the cracks in the plaster. each one a defense against the creeping decay of their apartment. Sophie studied her father's face carefully, her brow furrowed. "You're sad." Ethan hesitated, then knelt in front of her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I just had a rough day at work, that's all." "Did someone make you mad?" "No, sweetheart, they just don't need me anymore." Sophie's small hands reached for his, her touch gentle. "That's silly. I need you." The simplicity of her words shattered him. He pulled her into a tight hug, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, strawberries and cheap soap. "And I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Behind her, the nebulizer machine sat on the counter, a reminder of her asthma treatments. The prescription bottles lined up beside it were nearly empty. Rent was due in less than a week. And now, with no paycheck, the fragile stability he had built was crumbling. Yet even as the walls of his life seemed to close in, Ethan couldn't stop seeing Lily Harrington's twitching leg. On the other side of the city, the Harrington penthouse gleamed like a palace above the skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Central Park, where raindrops dappled the dark treetops. The apartment was a fortress of wealth, plush cream-colored rugs, bespoke furniture, priceless artwork adorning every wall. But amid the splendor, silence reigned. Victoria Harrington sat in her daughter's playroom, a cavernous space filled with soft blocks, bookshelves, and expensive toys that looked more like museum pieces than playthings. Lily sat in her wheelchair near the window, staring out at the rain, her teddy bear clutched tightly in her lap. Victoria's mind replayed the scene in the office over and over again. The janitor, the ball, his claim of being a former therapist. His eyes had been calm, not mocking, focused, analytical. It reminded her of the paramedics from the night of the accident 3 years ago, their gaze steady amid chaos. "Ridiculous," she muttered to herself, trying to silence the doubt. "The best neurologists in the country have confirmed it. The damage is permanent. There's no hope." Still, the image of Lily's toes curling beneath her blanket haunted her. Michael had been insistent after Ethan was fired. "Don't let a desperate janitor plant false hope in your head, Vic. It's cruel to her and cruel to you. Trust the experts. Trust Thorne." Dr. Adrian Thorne, head of pediatric neurology at St. David's Hospital, had become almost a fixture in their lives. He had reassured her countless times, his tone kind but firm, that Lily's condition was irreversible. He had prescribed the regimen of nerve support drops himself, amber bottles that lived in the medical cabinet. Victoria walked to the cabinet, her bare feet soundless against the marble floor. She took one of the bottles in her hand, staring at the label as though it might confess something to her. Her fingers trembled as she set it back down. "Mommy!" The soft voice snapped her back. Lily's voice had grown faint over the years. Used so rarely it often sounded like a whisper of air. Victoria turned, forcing a smile. "Yes, sweetheart?" Lily lifted her small finger and pointed toward the spot where the red ball had landed earlier that day. Her gaze was steady, her meaning clear. Victoria's chest tightened. She crossed the room, knelt by her daughter, and kissed her forehead. "Don't think about that ball anymore, darling." It was nothing, but in her heart, she wasn't sure. Back in Queens, the clock ticked past midnight as Ethan sat at the small kitchen table staring at his laptop. Job postings scrolled endlessly across the screen. Custodian, sanitation worker, facilities maintenance. Different uniforms for the same thankless work. Each rejection felt like a door slamming shut. He closed the laptop and rubbed his temples. Sophie was asleep in the bedroom, her small form curled beneath a quilt her late mother had sewn. The ache of loss washed over him like a tide. His wife, Anna, had been gone for 4 years now, taken by an illness they hadn't caught in time. Since then, Sophie had been his anchor, his reason to keep going. He looked at the sketch taped above the sink. Sophie's drawing of the two of them, holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Above it, in pink crayon, she had written, "Super Team Forever." Ethan clenched his fists. He couldn't afford to break down. Not now, and yet the thought kept returning. What if the doctors were wrong about Lily? Or worse, what if they weren't wrong, but someone wanted her to stay the way she was? Ethan knew the Harringtons weren't just wealthy, they were powerful. Men like Michael didn't simply smile in fake concern. They schemed. He had seen it in Michael's eyes. Calculation, control, ownership. If Lily wasn't as paralyzed as they claimed, what would that mean for them? Ethan didn't have the answer. But he knew one thing. He had seen the truth, and if there was one thing he couldn't do, no matter the cost, it was look away. The morning sun broke reluctantly over Manhattan, its pale light filtering through streaks of cloud and bouncing off glass towers. From the outside, the city looked invincible, every skyscraper a fortress of power, every street pulsing with ambition. But behind closed doors, truths festered in shadows, and some of them were about to claw their way into the light. At the Harrington penthouse Victoria, Harrington sat at the dining table, untouched coffee cooling in front of her. She had slept little the night before, haunted by the image of her daughter's toes curling under the blanket. Rationality told her it had been nothing more than a spasm. But instinct, the raw, maternal kind she had never learned to silence, told her otherwise. Michael entered the room like he owned it, his designer suit flawless, his hair immaculately styled. He poured himself a glass of fresh orange juice, his movements casual, but his eyes sharp. "You didn't sleep," he said, not as a question, but as an accusation. Victoria didn't look at him. Lily was restless. Michael leaned against the counter, swirling his juice. "You're letting what happened yesterday get to you. That janitor was playing mind games. People like him, failures, men who can't hold their lives together, they crave attention. He saw an opportunity and took it." Victoria's jaw tightened. "He said he was a physical therapist once." Michael's lips curved into a cold smile. "And now he scrubs toilets. That should tell you all you need to know." But Victoria wasn't convinced. She remembered the look in Ethan's eyes. Not madness, not cruelty, but focus. The kind of focus she had seen only in crisis workers who thrived under chaos. "I'm calling Dr. Thorne today," she said. Her voice firm. Michael's expression flickered, almost imperceptibly before settling back into calm. "Of course. He'll reassure you, as he always does." But Victoria noticed the flicker. And for the first time in years, she wondered if her brother's concern was truly for Lily or for something else entirely. Queens, Ethan and Sophie Ethan walked Sophie to school, her small hand tucked into his. She was chattering about a book she'd read, her words tumbling out in bursts of excitement. He smiled and nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, still trapped in that sterile office on the 47th floor. When they reached the faded brick school building, Sophie hugged him tightly. "You'll pick me up?" "Always," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. As she disappeared into the crowd of children, Ethan lingered at the gate, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He needed a new job, any job, but his gut told him that ignoring what he'd seen in Lily's leg would be a betrayal, not just to her but to Sophie too. He had always taught his daughter to stand up for the truth, even when it hurt. How could he do less? Later that morning, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his old laptop, scouring classified ads. But his eyes drifted to a dusty box in the corner of the room. He pulled it out, flipping open the lid to reveal remnants of a life he had abandoned. Medical journals, anatomy charts, therapy tools, and a framed certificate with his name, Ethan James Moore, licensed physical therapist. His fingers traced the certificate's glass, smudged and cracked at one corner. He remembered the last patient he had treated, a young boy injured in a car accident. They had told the boy's parents he would never walk again. But Ethan had seen something the others hadn't, and months later, that boy had taken his first steps into his mother's arms. The memory tightened something inside him. Maybe his life had crumbled. Maybe he was reduced to mopping floors, but his instincts hadn't abandoned him. He knew what he saw with Lily wasn't an illusion. At St. David's Hospital, Dr. Adrian Thorne stood in his corner office, staring out at the city. His reputation as the city's premier pediatric neurologist was untouchable, or so it seemed. On his desk lay a folder marked Harrington Lily, Confidential. The door opened. Michael Harrington stepped in without knocking, his expression tense. "We had a problem yesterday," Michael said flatly. "The janitor?" Thorne turned, feigning confusion. "The janitor?" He claims he saw something. A reflex in Lily's leg. For the first time, Thorne's mask slipped. His eyes narrowed, and he set his glass of water down carefully. "That's inconvenient," Michael paced, his voice low and dangerous. "My sister is unsettled. She's asking questions again. If she starts doubting the treatment plan, everything we've worked for unravels." Thorne's tone hardened. "Then you remind her that hope is dangerous. Remind her what the scans show. Remind her that you know what's best," Michael smirked. "Oh, I've reminded her. But she isn't as pliable as she once was." "She suspects." Thorne leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Then we make sure the truth never sees the light of day. If necessary, we discredit him. The janitor. Turn him into the unstable element." Michael's smile was slow and venomous. "Already ahead of you." Victoria's restlessness. That night, long after the city had quieted, Victoria found herself unable to sleep. She sat on the rug of Lily's playroom, watching her daughter's small chest rise and fall with each breath. The teddy bear rested beside her, worn from years of comfort, her heart twisted. She wanted to believe the doctors. She wanted to trust Michael, to cling to the certainty of medical expertise. But the image of Ethan's eyes, intense, unwavering, wouldn't leave her. She picked up the teddy bear, held it above the floor, and let it drop. For a moment, nothing. Then beneath the blanket, Lily's toes curled, just for an instant. But it was real. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She dropped the bear again. The same reaction. Her hands shook. Tears burned her eyes. The janitor hadn't been mocking them. He hadn't been cruel. He had been right. The coffee shop meeting. 2 days later, Ethan sat in a corner booth of a quiet coffee shop in Midtown. His stomach churned as he waited, his calloused hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee he couldn't afford. The bell over the door chimed. Victoria Harrington stepped inside, dressed not in her usual armor of power, but in a simple grey trench coat, her hair pulled back. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She slid into the booth across from him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I didn't have much of a choice," Ethan replied. "Your security chief made sure of that." "This isn't a threat," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "It's an apology." "And a request," Ethan leaned back, skeptical. "An apology?" "You were right," Victoria whispered, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "I saw it with my own eyes." Her toes moved, twice. It wasn't random. It wasn't a spasm. It was real. Ethan's breath caught, a mix of vindication and dread. "I need your help," she continued, her eyes pleading. "Not as a janitor, as what you really are." "A therapist," Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. Helping Lily would mean stepping back into a world he had left behind. A world that had broken him once before. But when he thought of Sophie and the values he had tried to teach her, the answer was already written in his bones. He nodded slowly. "If I do this, it has to be on my terms. No lies, full access to her medical records. And my daughter comes first, always." Victoria swallowed hard, then gave the faintest of nods. "Agreed." And just like that, an unlikely alliance was forged, one that would pit them against forces far more dangerous than they could imagine. For somewhere in the gleaming towers of Manhattan, secrets were being buried, and Ethan Moore was about to dig them up. The city was alive with its usual symphony of noise. Sirens in the distance, taxis honking, pedestrians crowding the sidewalks. But for Ethan, the world had narrowed to a single reality. He was stepping back into a fight he thought he had left behind forever. When Victoria Harrington had left the coffee shop that morning, her words had lingered in his mind like smoke that refused to clear. "I need your help. As what you really are." He hadn't heard those words in years. People no longer looked at him as a therapist, a healer, someone who gave people hope where there was none. To the world, he was just another invisible man with a mop and a bucket. But now, Someone powerful, someone who had once dismissed him with cruel words, had seen what he saw, and she was asking him to step back into the fire. That night, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Sophie, who was drawing another one of her endless masterpieces. She was sketching a superhero with a cape and boots, scrawling above it, "Daddy Strong." He watched her for a long moment, guilt twisting in his chest. What if taking this step meant danger not just for him, but for her? "Daddy," Sophie said suddenly, not looking up from her paper, "your eyes look like storm clouds. Are you scared?" Ethan forced a smile, but it was thin. "Maybe just a little." "Don't be," Sophie replied, matter of fact, coloring in the cape. "Storms pass. Superheroes don't." He reached across the table and ruffled her hair, his throat tightening. She would never know how much he needed her words in that moment. 2 nights later, Ethan walked into the Harrington penthouse through a private service entrance, his heart pounding. Victoria had arranged everything discreetly. No one but her and the household's night nurse knew he was coming. The penthouse was silent, marble floors gleaming like ice under soft golden light. He followed Victoria through a dim corridor until they reached Lily's room. The sight of the little girl hit him harder than he expected. She sat upright in her wheelchair, teddy bear in her lap, eyes wide as though she had been waiting for him. For the first time, he didn't see her as the Harrington heiress or a symbol of power wrapped in silk blankets. She was just a child. Fragile, lonely, desperate to break free from the invisible chains that held her. Ethan knelt to meet her eyes. "Hi, Lily, my name's Ethan. Your mom asked me to see if we can play a little game." "You like games?" She nodded faintly, the barest movement of her chin. He smiled softly. "Good, because I do too." Victoria hovered behind them, her arms crossed tightly. But her eyes betrayed something rare, hope. Ethan began with the simplest tests, brushing the sole of Lily's foot, tapping just below her kneecap. And there it was again, the faintest flicker. A twitch no machine could fake, no spasm could explain. He felt his chest tighten, adrenaline flooding him. "You see it too, don't you?" Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes," Ethan said quietly, though his eyes never left Lily's. "Your daughter's nervous system isn't completely shut down. She's responding, which means—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Which means she might walk again." Victoria covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. For years, she had steeled herself against hope, telling herself it was poison. But now, standing in her daughter's room, hearing those words, it was as though someone had unlocked a door she had bolted shut. From that night onward, Ethan began visiting secretly, disguised as a private consultant under the vague title of rehabilitation specialist. Victoria arranged the cover story carefully. Michael was told nothing. Every session took place at night, after the staff retired, when the city outside was a blur of lights and sirens. The therapy was painstaking. Ethan worked with Lily's tiny muscles, coaxing them with gentle stretches, stimulating responses with small exercises. At first, progress was almost invisible, a toe twitch here, a muscle contraction there. But Ethan was patient. He had done this before. He knew the road was long, but he also knew where it could lead. Lily, too, seemed to come alive, in ways Victoria hadn't seen in years. She responded to Ethan's calm voice, his quiet encouragement, the way he treated her not like a broken doll, but a fighter. She began to smile, faintly at first, then with growing warmth. Her teddy bear became her cheerleader, placed at the edge of the bed during every session. But while hope bloomed in that room, shadows deepened elsewhere. Michael had begun to notice changes. Victoria was distracted, her late-night hours unexplained. When he pressed her, she brushed him off with vague answers. But Michael Harrington wasn't a man who tolerated secrets. He began quietly questioning staff, reviewing schedules, even slipping into Victoria's study to scan her call logs. And one night, he caught something that made his blood run cold, an unsigned invoice from a medical supply vendor for therapy equipment. Small items, nothing flashy, but enough to tell him the truth. Victoria was hiding something. He paid a visit to Dr. Adrian Thorne the next morning. She's wavering, Michael said bluntly, pacing in Thorne's office. She's doubting the diagnosis, and someone is fueling that doubt. Thorne leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. The janitor. Michael's smile was sharp, humorless. Not just a janitor. A man with a past. He's been in our house. Thorne's eyes narrowed. Then he's a threat. Michael poured himself a drink from the decanter on Thorne's shelf, his tone casual, but his words deadly. Then we'll treat him like one. My sister must never know what really keeps Lily in that chair. Do you understand? Thorne's lips curved into something dark. Completely. That evening Ethan walked home through the rain with a new spring in his step. For the first time in years, he felt alive, like he was doing what he was meant to do. He thought of Sophie, and how proud she would be if she knew her dad was helping a little girl fight her way back to her feet. But as he reached his building and fumbled for his keys, he felt it, that prickle on the back of his neck, the unmistakable sense of being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, but the street was empty, only shadows stretching long in the lamplight. Still, the feeling lingered. He had no idea that forces far greater than him had already marked his name, that his quiet visits to the penthouse had not only awakened Lily's hope, but had also triggered a storm powerful enough to destroy everything he loved. The following week unfolded like the tightening of a noose, subtle at first, barely noticeable, but slowly constricting until every breath felt heavier. Ethan had no illusions about what he was risking. Each time he stepped into the Harrington penthouse, he knew he was trespassing into a world that did not forgive intrusions. And yet he kept coming, because each night Lily's eyes grew brighter, and each night the flicker in her legs grew stronger. Victoria was careful. Every detail of his visits was arranged with precision. He came through the service entrance. She dismissed unnecessary staff early, citing Lily's need for quiet. The household's night nurse, Mrs. Alvarez, was discreet and loyal, paid handsomely for her silence. Together, they had constructed a fragile cocoon of secrecy around Lily's rehabilitation. But cocoon walls, no matter how carefully woven, are thin. One evening, Ethan sat on the rug of Lily's room, holding a small wooden puzzle. "Okay, champ," he said, sliding the pieces across the floor. "I want you to try to lean forward and pick the blue one. Don't think about it too much. Just trust me." Lily's brows furrowed with concentration. She clenched her teddy bear tighter in one hand, then released it onto the bed, freeing her tiny fingers. Slowly, tremblingly, she bent forward. Her hand reached, faltered, then steadied. She brushed the edge of the blue piece, grasped it, and lifted it shakily toward Ethan. Victoria gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "My God." Ethan smiled, a quiet triumph blazing in his chest. "See, that's strength. That's control. She's not just responding, she's fighting." Lily looked up at him, and for the first time in years, a spark of pride lit her face. She whispered one word, faint but steady, "Again." Victoria covered her mouth, overcome. She hadn't heard her daughter ask for more in years, not from therapists, not from teachers, not from life itself. That night, after Ethan left, Victoria sat alone in her study, the city lights sprawling beyond her windows. She replayed every small victory in her mind, but fear gnawed at the edges. If Michael discovered what she was doing, he would stop it. He would twist it into madness, recklessness, betrayal. She could already hear his voice. "You're letting false hope ruin you." Do you want to put her through that again? But this wasn't false hope. It was real. She had seen it with her own eyes. While Victoria wrestled with her doubts, Michael Harrington was not idle. His suspicions had sharpened into conviction. He had bribed one of the building's concierges for security camera footage. Grainy clips showed Ethan slipping in and out of the service entrance on nights he wasn't supposed to be there. It was enough to confirm everything. In Thorne's office the next day, Michael spread the photographs across the doctor's mahogany desk. "He's inside. She's bringing him in." Thorne leaned forward, studying the images. His face remained calm, but his fingers tapped against the glass of his whiskey tumbler. "Then it's worse than I thought. If he documents anything, if he gathers proof." Michael's smile was thin and predatory. "Then he won't live to show it." Thorne arched a brow. You'd risk that? Michael's eyes were like ice. I'd risk everything. If Lily walks, the entire structure collapses. The inheritance, the trust, the leverage we've built, all gone. My sister will have no reason to rely on me. And you, he let the sentence dangle poison in the air. Thorne drained his glass. Then we discredit him. Make him look dangerous, delusional. If he pushes further, we handle it. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to juggle two worlds, the fragile hope blooming in Lily's room and the crumbling life in his apartment. Sophie's asthma medication was running out. The landlord had slipped another warning under the door. Each morning, he sent Sophie off to school with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, then carried the weight of survival into the city. One afternoon, as he picked Sophie up, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Windows tinted, engine idling. A man inside pretended to read a newspaper. The car had been there yesterday too, and the day before. That night, as Sophie slept, Ethan sat by the window, staring into the street below. The sedan was gone, but the unease wasn't. He knew the Harringtons had reach, and he knew Michael was watching. The question wasn't if they would come for him, it was when. 2 weeks into the secret therapy, Lily achieved something that made Victoria weep openly. With Ethan's guidance, she managed to push her foot against the floor and hold it there for nearly 10 seconds. It was shaky, trembling, but it was hers. You did that, Ethan told her gently. Not me, not your mom, you. Lily's lips curved into the smallest smile. For a child who had known only frustration and silence, it was a victory greater than gold. Victoria embraced her daughter, her tears soaking into Lily's hair. For years, she had watched her baby shrink into herself, retreating from the world. But now, in this tiny act of defiance against her fate, she saw resurrection. Ethan left the penthouse that night with hope burning in his chest. And as he stepped into the service alley, 2 men blocked his path. Broad-shouldered, dressed in black coats, faces half hidden by the shadows. You Ethan Moore. One of them asked, though it was clear they already knew. Ethan's instincts flared. He shifted his weight, ready for a fight if it came. Who's asking? The man smirked. Friends. Just wanted to let you know. People like you don't last long when they stick their nose where it doesn't belong. The other man stepped closer, his breath acrid with tobacco. Stay away from the Harrington girl. Last warning. They shoved him against the wall, hard enough to knock the air from his lungs, then disappeared into the shadows. Ethan stood frozen, chest heaving, anger boiling in his veins. He could walk away. He could protect Sophie, protect himself, and let the Harringtons rot in their secrets. That would be the safe choice, the rational one. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's trembling foot pressing against the floor, saw Sophie's drawing of him as a superhero. And he knew some battles weren't about safety. They were about doing what was right, no matter the cost. Ethan Moore had stumbled into a war he hadn't asked for. But he would not walk away, because sometimes the only way to protect your own child was to save someone else's. Ethan Moore had not slept properly in weeks. Every night, when he lay down on the sagging mattress beside Sophie's bed, the shadows on the wall seemed to whisper threats. The memory of the 2 men shoving him against the alley wall replayed in his mind over and over, their voices echoing, "Stay away from the Harrington girl." Last warning, but warnings had never stopped him before. Years ago, when hospitals had written off patients as hopeless, Ethan had ignored their verdicts and fought for his patients' dignity. He had paid a price for that stubbornness, losing his career, his confidence, and almost his will to live. Yet here he was again, standing in the same fire, refusing to look away. Every time he looked at Sophie's sleeping face, he knew he couldn't quit. He wanted her to grow up in a world where truth mattered, where men with power couldn't strangle hope to protect their fortunes. And so, every night, he went back to the Harrington penthouse. The sessions with Lily grew longer and more intense. Ethan introduced gentle resistance bands, small balance games, even laughter exercises, where she'd giggle while trying to hold herself upright. Slowly, Painfully, she was awakening muscles that had been silenced for years. Victoria watched every session, her heart breaking and healing all at once. She had spent years steeling herself against disappointment, burying hope like a corpse. But now hope was resurrecting itself before her eyes. Each time Lily's foot pressed harder, each time her little hand reached with more control, Victoria felt chains snapping inside her. One night after Ethan left, Victoria stayed by Lily's side long after midnight. She whispered to her daughter, stroking her hair, "You are stronger than they know, stronger than I knew." Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. "And I will never let anyone take that away again." But the walls of the Harrington Empire had ears. Michael had grown restless. His sources in the building confirmed Ethan's late-night visits. He had confronted Victoria once, casually, while sipping his wine in the drawing room. "Odd, isn't it, that the janitor you fired keeps showing up?" he said lightly, swirling the glass. Victoria had smiled coolly, masking her fear. "You're imagining things, Michael. The staff come and go all the time." Michael had said nothing more, but his eyes had lingered on her, sharp and probing. That night he made a call. Within days, Ethan began noticing small signs. A man following him half a block behind on his way home. His mailbox tampered with, his phone buzzing with anonymous calls that went dead when answered. It wasn't paranoia. It was surveillance. At St. David's Hospital, Dr. Adrian Thorne studied Lily's files with a cold detachment. He had built his reputation on certainty, on pronouncements of finality, irreversible, permanent, no hope. And the Harrington case had been his crown jewel. An heiress, declared a medical tragedy, bound forever to his authority. If that diagnosis unraveled, so would his empire. Michael visited him often now, their conversations turning darker. "She's improving," Michael admitted one evening, slamming his hand on Thorne's desk. "I can see it in her face. My sister is glowing with hope again. She thinks she's found a savior in that washed-up therapist." Thorne's lips tightened. "Then we destroy him. It won't be hard. Men like him always have shadows in their past. We'll paint him as unstable, dangerous. If necessary, we'll arrange an accident." Michael's eyes glittered in the lamplight. "Do it." Meanwhile, Ethan tried to maintain some sense of normal life with Sophie. On weekends, they walked through Flushing Meadows Park, sharing ice cream cones they could barely afford. Sophie chatted about school, her favorite teacher, the play they were rehearsing. Ethan smiled, but behind his eyes, tension simmered. One Saturday, as Sophie ran ahead chasing pigeons, Ethan noticed a man leaning against a lamppost, watching too closely. Not at the pigeons, not at the park. At Sophie, a chill ripped through him. He rushed forward, scooping his daughter up despite her giggles of protest. "Daddy, what are you doing?" We're keeping you safe," he whispered, scanning the man until he slipped away into the crowd. That night, Ethan couldn't shake the terror. They weren't just threatening him anymore. They were circling Sophie. Back at the penthouse, Lily was beginning to whisper more words during therapy, soft, halting but real. One evening, as she managed to hold herself upright for a full minute, she looked at Ethan and whispered, "Thank you." He smiled, though his throat ached. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You're doing the work." Victoria turned away so neither of them could see her tears. But while hope bloomed in that hidden room, the storm outside grew darker. Michael finally confronted Victoria directly one evening at dinner. The table was long, laid with silver and crystal, but only the two siblings sat across from each other. "You've been lying to me," Michael said simply, slicing his steak with surgical precision. "Bringing him here, giving that child false hope." Victoria set down her fork, her hands trembling only slightly. "I'm giving her truth. Something you've never cared about." Michael's smile was a razor. "Truth? You think you know truth, Vic? The truth is fragile. It shatters so easily under pressure. And when it does, people bleed." For the first time in years, Victoria met his gaze without flinching. "Let it shatter then. I'll bleed if I have to." Michael's expression flickered with cold fury, but he said nothing more. He knew then his sister had slipped from his control, and that made her dangerous. The next night, as Ethan left the penthouse, he noticed the black sedan waiting again at the curb. But this time it wasn't empty posturing. As he turned the corner, the sedan pulled forward, cutting him off. Two men stepped out, the same as before, their faces harder now. One of them grabbed him by the collar, slamming him into the hood of the car. "You didn't listen," the man growled. The other leaned close, whispering hot against his ear. "Walk away or your little girl becomes the next patient." Ethan froze, terror flooding him. Sophie, they knew about Sophie. The men shoved him to the ground and drove off, tires screeching. Ethan lay on the wet pavement, chest heaving, rage and fear twisting together inside him. He had a choice. He could run, disappear with Sophie, hide from the storm, or he could fight. He looked at his scraped hands, then up at the city skyline glowing above him. He thought of Lily's trembling foot pressing against the floor. He thought of Sophie's drawing, Daddy Strong, and in that moment Ethan Moore knew there was no turning back. He would fight. For Lily, for Sophie, for every truth buried under the weight of men like Michael Harrington, even if it cost him everything. The rain had fallen all night, slicking the streets of Manhattan with a silver sheen that reflected the city's endless lights. Ethan walked with his collar pulled high, every nerve in his body tight as wire. He hadn't told Victoria about the latest threat. How could he? It wasn't just his life at stake now, it was Sophie's. Inside the Harrington penthouse, however, Victoria already sensed the storm closing in. Her brother's temper had become sharper, his visits more frequent, his questions more pointed. She kept her face composed, the mask of a CEO, but in her heart she felt the slow tightening of a noose. That evening, when Ethan arrived, he found her pacing in the playroom, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Lily sat in her chair nearby, her eyes flickering between her mother and Ethan as though she understood more than either of them believed. "You're in danger," Victoria said abruptly, her voice low but urgent. "Michael knows. He suspects you're working with me. He won't stop until he destroys you." Ethan sighed, running a tired hand over his face. "He's already started. 2 men cornered me last night. They threatened Sophie." At that, Victoria froze, her composure shattering for a fraction of a second. "Your daughter," she whispered, horror flashing in her eyes. "They're dragging children into this now?" "That's how they work," Ethan said bitterly. "When they can't break you, they come for what you love." Lily stirred in her chair, clutching the small wooden bird Ethan had carved for her days before. With a trembling hand, she placed it on the table between them. A silent gesture, as if to say, "Don't give up." Later that night, Victoria invited Ethan into her private office, something she had never done before. The walls were lined with bookshelves, heavy with leather-bound volumes and framed photographs of Harrington ancestors. But at the center was her desk, and upon it, a locked steel case. She unlocked it with shaking hands. Inside were medical records, test results and prescriptions, years' worth of paperwork that had been presented to her as gospel truth. "I've been reading them again," she said, her voice trembling. "And something doesn't add up." Ethan leaned over, scanning the pages. His eyes stopped at one particular bottle name that appeared over and over, cyclomyrexin hydrochloride. A muscle relaxant. His heart stopped. He grabbed the papers. "This isn't nerve support. This isn't therapy. This—" He slammed the page with his palm. "This suppresses motor signals. Victoria, don't you see? They weren't treating her. They were paralyzing her." The room went silent. Only the rain tapping against the glass could be heard. Victoria's face drained of color. "You mean—" "She could have been healing this entire time," Ethan whispered, rage boiling in his veins. "Her nerves were trying to reconnect, but this poison was cutting off every signal." "They've been keeping her paralyzed!" Victoria staggered back, her hand clutching the edge of the desk. For years she had trusted Dr. Thorne, paid him millions, relied on his authority to make sense of her daughter's tragedy. And now the truth came crashing down like a blade. "My God," she choked. "I let them do this to her. I let them steal 3 years of her life." Ethan grabbed her shoulders firmly. "No, you didn't know. They deceived you. But now you do know, and we can stop it." The plan they devised was simple yet dangerous. Replace Lily's medication with a placebo. Distilled water. If Ethan was right, if the drug was the cage holding Lily down, then the absence of it would let her body begin to awaken. Victoria arranged for a discreet courier, one of the few people still loyal only to her. A new bottle was delivered the next morning, identical in every way to the old one. She switched them herself while the nurse was out of the room, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped it. From that day forward, Lily received only water under the guise of medicine, and almost immediately things began to change. Her eyes grew brighter, her hands steadier, her hums turned into words, short at first, yes, no, bird, then full sentences. And then, one extraordinary morning, she laughed, a full, clear laugh that rang through the penthouse halls like music long forgotten. Victoria collapsed into a chair, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. Ethan stood frozen, his chest tight, his heart breaking open. It was the sound of a child reclaiming her stolen life. But every miracle brought new danger. Michael was watching. The Harrington penthouse was riddled with cameras, most of them placed under the pretense of security. Victoria had forgotten some, overlooked others, but Michael had not. He had footage of Ethan's sessions with Lily, of her moving, speaking, laughing. One evening, he stormed into Victoria's office, a tablet in his hand. He slammed it on her desk. On the screen, Lily's voice echoed faintly. "I'm tall." Victoria stiffened, her heart hammering. "You're lying to me," Michael hissed, his face contorted with rage. "You're conspiring with that man. Do you understand what this means? Do you know what will happen when this leaks? Every doctor we've ever trusted will be humiliated, Thorne's reputation ruined, our family dragged through the mud, and I will not let you destroy everything Father built because of your childish hope." Victoria rose slowly, her eyes blazing. "It's not childish hope. It's the truth. She's getting better, Michael, and nothing you say will stop me from believing what I see with my own eyes." Michael leaned close, his voice a venomous whisper. "You'll regret this." That night, Ethan returned home to find his apartment door ajar. His stomach dropped. He rushed inside. Sophie's bed was empty. Panic tore through him like fire. "Sophie! Sophie!" He tore through every room, but she was gone. On the kitchen table lay a single folded note. In neat handwriting, "Back off, or the girl disappears forever." Ethan's knees buckled, his vision swam. His little girl, the one reason he had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, was now a pawn in their war. He collapsed against the wall, clutching the note, his heart hammering with terror and rage. He knew who had done this. Michael Harrington had made his move, and now Ethan would have to make his. Ethan Moore spent the longest night of his life pacing the narrow walls of his apartment. Sophie's laughter still echoed in his head, her small arms that had hugged him only hours before. Now the silence was unbearable. He held the note in his hand until it crumpled, his knuckles white. By dawn, his eyes were bloodshot, but his mind was sharpened to a blade's edge. Michael Harrington had taken his daughter, and Ethan knew one truth as solid as stone. There was no law, no police, no institution he could trust. The Harrington empire stretched its fingers everywhere. Judges, lawyers, even cops owed favors to Michael. If Ethan called the authorities, Sophie would vanish forever. He needed to fight from the shadows, like the invisible man he had become in life. At the penthouse, Victoria noticed the change the moment Ethan walked in. His clothes were wrinkled, his face pale with exhaustion, but his eyes, those steady eyes, were blazing with something far more dangerous than anger. "What happened?" she demanded the moment Agnes the nurse left the room. Ethan looked at Lily, then back at Victoria. His voice cracked but stayed firm. "They took Sophie. Your brother has her." Victoria staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God!" "He left a note," Ethan continued, pulling the crumpled paper from his pocket. "He wants me gone. He wants me to disappear. And if I don't—" His voice broke, but he forced the words out. "If I don't, my little girl is gone." For a moment, silence suffocated the room. Then unexpectedly, Lily spoke. Her voice was still fragile, halting but clear. "Not gone. Fight." Both adults froze, their eyes snapping to her. Lily's small hands clutched the wooden squirrel Ethan had carved. Her eyes were fierce, far older than her years. It was as though the child herself had issued a command neither adult could disobey. That night, Victoria summoned Ethan into her private office again. She poured 2 glasses of scotch, though Ethan barely touched his. On the desk between them lay a folder she had never shared with anyone. "This is everything I have on Michael," she said, her voice low but steady. "Financial records, offshore accounts, shell corporations. If you want to take on my brother, you need leverage. Money is his only god." Ethan scanned the documents. Fraud, embezzlement, laundered cash through medical foundations, bribes to politicians. Enough to bury a man 10 times over. "Why haven't you used this?" Ethan asked. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because if I expose him, the board will collapse. Harrington Financial will shatter. Thousands of employees, families, everything will go down with it." "I was too afraid." Ethan leaned forward. "But now he's kidnapped my daughter. And if we don't stop him, he'll destroy Lily too. He doesn't care about the company. He only cares about control." Victoria met his gaze. For the first time, she felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just a CEO guarding her empire. She was a mother fighting alongside another parent. "All right," she whispered. "Then we burn him." Meanwhile, Michael was not idle. Sophie was not kept in some damp basement or shack. Michael was too clever for that. Instead, she was lodged in a private guest house on one of the Harrington estates upstate, surrounded by manicured gardens and silent staff who looked the other way. She was frightened, yes, but not mistreated. Michael knew that bruises would complicate things. Fear was a sharper weapon than pain. He visited her once, his cologne filling the small room. "You miss your father, don't you?" he said, in a falsely gentle tone. Sophie glared at him, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. "He'll find me," Michael smirked. "No, sweetheart. He'll leave, because he knows what happens if he doesn't." But beneath his calm words, Michael felt something new. Unease. The girl's eyes held the same fire as her father's. It unsettled him. Back in the city, Ethan and Victoria began to weave their counterattack. They couldn't strike directly. They needed evidence stronger than rumor, stronger than Michael's lies. Ethan suggested an ally from his past, Marco, a biochemist friend who had already tested Lily's medication. "If we can prove not just fraud, but deliberate poisoning," Ethan said. "Then even Michael can't silence that," Victoria agreed. And together they devised a plan. Switch one of the supposed nerve support bottles and send it to Marco without Michael knowing. But this time, they couldn't afford a mistake. The next evening, while Agnes was distracted, Victoria slipped the bottle into her handbag. Her hands trembled so violently she almost dropped it, but Ethan steadied her wrist. "For Lily, for Sophie," he said quietly. Victoria nodded, her eyes brimming. "For them both." Days blurred into nights. Lily grew stronger with each passing hour off the drug. She was able to stand, gripping Ethan's hands, her knees shaking but her smile radiant. For the first time, Victoria dared to film a short clip on her phone, Lily's laughter ringing out as she took 2 halting steps into her mother's arms. Victoria replayed that video dozens of times in secret, holding it like a sacred flame, but the danger grew in equal measure. Michael's spies reported Lily's progress. Dr. Thorne stormed into the penthouse one morning, his face pale, his voice frantic. "This is reckless," he hissed. "If she's moving, it's spasms, uncontrolled. You're putting her life in danger." Victoria, for the first time, looked him in the eye with pure loathing. "No, Doctor, you're the danger, and soon the world will know it." Thorne faltered, unnerved by her defiance. He left quickly, but Ethan knew he would not retreat quietly. Then came the breaking point. Late one night, Victoria received a call from a blocked number. She answered, her heart racing. Michael's voice slithered through the speaker. "You think you're clever, sister. But I know everything. The janitor, the missing medicine, the lies. Do you think you can win against me?" Victoria's hand shook. "Give Sophie back, Michael. She's a child, for God's sake." Michael chuckled darkly. "So is Lily, but that hasn't stopped you from turning her into a circus act. You want Sophie? Then end this charade. Fire Cole. Sign over full guardianship of Lily to me. Do that and maybe you'll see his daughter again." Victoria's blood ran cold. Guardianship of Lily? Michael didn't just want control of the company. He wanted control of her child. When she hung up, Ethan was waiting in the shadows of her office. One look at her face told him everything. "They've escalated," he muttered. Victoria's lips trembled, but her voice was steel. "Then so will we." The next day, Ethan received a text on the burner phone. "She's ready." He rushed to the penthouse, where Victoria met him at the door, her face pale but triumphant. In the playroom, Lily stood, not holding a table, not leaning against a wall. She stood, wobbling, trembling, but upright, her arms outstretched toward them both. "Daddy!" she whispered, her eyes on Ethan. Ethan's throat constricted. She had called him Daddy. A slip, perhaps, but one born of trust. He rushed forward, steadying her as she took 3 slow, deliberate steps into his arms. Victoria wept openly, falling to her knees beside them. But even as joy filled the room, Ethan felt the weight of reality pressing down. This miracle was not theirs alone. Michael was watching. Michael was waiting. And when he struck again, he would strike harder than ever. That night, as Ethan carried Sophie's picture in his wallet and Lily's laughter in his ears, he made himself a vow. He would not only save Sophie, he would not only free Lily, he would bring down Michael Harrington and Dr. Adrian Thorne once and for all, even if he had to tear apart the empire brick by brick. The storm finally broke over Manhattan with a violence that seemed to echo the war unfolding within the Harrington family. Thunder rattled the glass towers, lightning split the sky, and in the heart of it all, Ethan Moore stood at the crossroads of fear and determination. He had one mission: to bring Sophie home and end Michael Harrington's reign of terror. For days, Ethan and Victoria had been preparing in secret. Marco, Ethan's biochemist friend, had finished analyzing the bottle Victoria had stolen. The report was damning, irrefutable proof that Dr. Adrian Thorne had prescribed high doses of cyclomyrexin, not as a treatment, but as a deliberate suppressant. The report was signed, stamped, and accompanied by lab results. It was a weapon, but one that needed careful use. "We can't go public yet," Ethan explained as he spread the papers across Victoria's desk late one night. "If we release this now, Michael will bury it in lawsuits before it even hits the press. And Sophie doesn't have that kind of time." Victoria paced, her hands clenched. "So what do? "We draw him out," Ethan said grimly. "We make him desperate enough to expose himself. And while he's busy, I'll find Sophie." Victoria looked at him, her face pale but resolute. "Then let's end this." Michael had grown reckless. His fury at Victoria's defiance had reached a fever pitch, and his control over Dr. Thorne was slipping as the physician's fear of exposure deepened. One evening, Michael stormed into Thorne's office, slamming a file onto the desk. "You told me the girl would never walk again." Thorne's hands shook as he opened the file, which contained photographs from hidden cameras in the penthouse. Lily standing with Ethan's support. Lily laughing, Lily speaking. "This isn't possible," Thorne whispered, his face draining of color. "Not unless what?" Michael barked. Thorne swallowed hard. "Unless the drug was removed, she shouldn't be improving like this." Michael's eyes narrowed to slits. "Then my sister betrayed me." He turned on his heel. "And betrayal has consequences." The next night, Ethan received an anonymous text. Pier 47. Midnight. "Come alone if you ever want to see Sophie again." He stared at the message, his chest tightening. It was a trap, of course it was. But he had no choice. Victoria insisted on coming, but Ethan shook his head. If something happens to me, you need to protect Lily. She's your daughter. She needs you, and Sophie needs you, Victoria countered, her voice breaking. For a moment, the mask of the CEO slipped, and she was simply a mother terrified for them all. Don't let him win, Ethan. The docks were empty that night, the river black and restless beneath the storm. Ethan approached cautiously, every sense alert. And then he saw her, Sophie, standing in the shadow of a warehouse, her small hands bound, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy!" she cried when she saw him. He rushed forward, but a figure stepped out of the darkness. Michael Harrington, flanked by two men. His smile was cold, cruel, illuminated by the lightning above. "You should have left when you had the chance," Michael sneered. "But you couldn't, could you? You just had to play the hero." Ethan stood tall, though his heart hammered. "Let her go, Michael. She's a child. She has nothing to do with this." Michael's laugh was bitter. "Everything has to do with this. My company, my name, my control. And you're a stain I mean to scrub out." He gestured, and one of the men shoved Sophie forward roughly. Ethan caught her in his arms, holding her close. Relief and terror surged together. She was here, alive, but they were surrounded. "You'll never win," Ethan said quietly. "The truth is coming. About Thorn. About you. We have the proof." For the first time, Michael's mask cracked. Rage twisted his features. "And then you won't live to show it." But what Michael didn't know was that Victoria had refused to stay behind. From a hidden distance, she had followed Ethan, her phone streaming live to a private network of journalists and board members she had summoned in secret. Every word Michael spoke was being recorded. When he threatened Ethan's life, the evidence was captured. When he admitted to control and deceit, it was broadcast. The empire he clung to so tightly was unraveling in real time. Victoria stepped out of the shadows then, her voice ringing clear against the storm. "It's over, Michael." Michael spun, his eyes widening as he saw the phone in her hand. You poisoned my daughter," Victoria said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You stole years from her life. And you dared to take his child. You're finished." The men at Michael's side hesitated, uncertainty flashing in their eyes. For years they had followed his orders without question. But now, confronted with his corruption laid bare, their loyalty wavered. Michael saw it too. Desperation twisted him. He lunged for Victoria, but Ethan was faster. He shoved Sophie into her mother's arms and met Michael head-on. The two men clashed violently on the slick dock, fists flying, their grunts and the crash of thunder merging into one. Michael fought with the fury of a man who had always been obeyed, while Ethan fought with the desperate strength of a father. In the end, it was Sophie's cry, "Daddy!" that gave Ethan the final surge he needed. With one decisive blow, he knocked Michael backward. The man stumbled, arms flailing, and fell hard against the dock. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Victoria's broadcast had already summoned them. Michael lay gasping, defeated, as the red and blue lights swept across the stormy river. The aftermath was chaos. Michael Harrington was arrested on charges of kidnapping, conspiracy, and corporate fraud. Dr. Adrian Thorne was taken into custody as well, his medical license stripped, his reputation in ruins. The Harrington Empire shook to its foundations, but under Victoria's leadership, it began to rebuild, not as a machine of greed, but as a force for healing, and in the center of it all was Lily. Freed from the poison that had shackled her, she bloomed with breathtaking speed. Within weeks she was standing unaided. Within months she was walking short distances. And one bright spring morning in the garden behind the Harrington estate, she ran, clumsy, joyous steps into her mother's waiting arms. Victoria wept openly, clutching her daughter. Ethan and Sophie watched nearby, their hearts swelling. "You see that, Daddy?" Sophie whispered, tugging at Ethan's sleeve. "She's free now." Ethan smiled, tears glistening in his own eyes. "Yes, sweet pea, she's free." In the months that followed, the four of them became inseparable. Sophie and Lily were like sisters, filling the Harrington home with laughter. Ethan and Victoria, once worlds apart, grew closer with every shared triumph. Every quiet evening spent planning a better future for their daughters. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, Victoria turned to Ethan on the terrace. Her hand trembled as she took his. "You saved her," she whispered. "You saved me." "I don't know how to thank you." Ethan shook his head gently. "You don't have to. We're family now." And for the first time in years, Victoria allowed herself to believe it. On the day of their small wedding, there were no reporters, no flashing cameras, no society guests. Just a garden bathed in golden light, two little girls scattering flower petals, and two hearts that had walked through fire to find each other. As Victoria and Ethan exchanged vows, Sophie and Lily held hands, their smiles wide and free. The future stretched before them, not perfect, not easy, but real. And in that moment, as laughter rang through the garden, Ethan Moore finally knew that the war was over. He had won, not with fists, not with rage, but with truth, love, and the unbreakable bond of family.